Alright, I'm going to jump right into it. We have what I feel is a powerful story about Joseph. So we're going to go back to Genesis. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to bring it all the way to chapter 50. So, pretty much just a quick outline. Joseph, he's the son of Jacob, aka Israel, and we're going to talk about his story from at the time when he was 17 years old, leading up to whenever he was 110 years old. So we're going to look at what that whole history of Joseph is like. This man had it rough. He had it rough. And not only did he have it rough, but the entire time that things just weren't going his way, he always, he gave glory to God. He kept his eyes on what the Lord had for him in his best interest. He never allowed his bad situations to overcome him and to turn him into an individual that God didn't intend for him to become. So, Joseph persevered, and this is about to be crazy. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, here's what we got going on here. So, Genesis 37. Joseph is 17 years old. And if we go to, and by the way, Joseph, there was 12 siblings. He was the 12th sibling. He was the youngest out of all 12. And it says in Genesis 37:3, it says that now Israel, aka Jacob, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. And also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Can you imagine that? You have 11 other brothers who are older than you. You look up to them. You probably want to be like at least one or two of them. And none of them like you. All your brothers hate you. And they hate you not for something that you've done. They hate you for the fact that because their father loves you more than he loves them. And that's nothing that Joseph couldn't have said or made his father feel any other way. That's just how his father felt. And that's the actions that his father showed onto Joseph amongst his brothers. It's not Joseph's fault. But yet Joseph was hated for actions from somebody else. Keep that in mind because this happens a lot in his life. So his brothers hated him. And then Joseph came to his brothers in Genesis 37:5-11. It talks about the dreams that Joseph had, and he wanted to share those dreams with his family. So the first dream that he had was Joseph had a dream that all of them were getting together sheaves, and what sheaves are is they are just bundles of wheat. They're bundles of grain, right? And he was telling all of his brothers, hey, in my dream, all my sheaves were bound down, all y'all's sheaves were bound down to my sheaf. And his brothers got angry about that and were saying, so what, we're supposed to bow down to you now? You think that mighty and high of yourself? And then he had a second dream. And in the second dream, his dream was that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. So that now not only was his brothers saying, man, we're not about to bow down to you. This ain't never going to happen. And here you are thinking you're so much better than us because our Father loves you and he gave you a colorful tunic and he treats you so much better. So therefore you think you're better than us. And the dreams went like this whenever he stated to him. Genesis 37:7, it says this. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to you, to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, and but his father kept the matter in mind. So now, with Joseph coming to his brothers about the dream that he was having, that angered them even more. They really thought Joseph was feeling himself at that point. So then if we fast forward a little bit, we go to Genesis 37:19 through 20. His brothers are now wanting to kill him. They're making plots to kill him, is what they're doing now. So they went from just hating him to now they want to kill their younger brother because he had a dream. And it all started with they having hate in their hearts towards him for the love that their father was showing Joseph that Joseph had no control over. So in Genesis 37:19 through 20, it says, "Then they said to one another, 'Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams.'" Fast forward a little bit, Reuben, one of the brothers of Joseph, he, out of all 11 brothers, he didn't want to kill Joseph. He wasn't feeling Joseph, but he definitely didn't want to kill Joseph. So he told his brothers, he said, "Let's not kill him, but instead let's just cast him into the pit," right? Let's cast him into the pit. And Joseph and Reuben agreed with that because he was later going to come back to the pit, pull Joseph out of the pit, and save him. But it went like this. So in Genesis 37:21, it says, 37:20 verses 21 through 22, it says, "But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, 'Let us not kill him.' And Reuben said to them, 'Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, so that he might be able to deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father.' So now it comes to pass, Joseph is walking up. He has no idea what's about to happen. And they throw Joseph into the pit. They take the tunic off of him, throw him into the pit. And then, I guess Reuben at some point, he wasn't there for the whole scenario because he had left, but his brothers had threw him into the pit, took the tunic off of him. And then now his brothers are sitting here eating some food after they had done this to the brother, right? And what they did was Judah, one of his brothers, he had an idea. He said, "Man, instead of allowing him to die in this pit, we don't want his blood to be on our hands, for he's our flesh. Let's sell him. Let's sell our brother." So then in Genesis 37:26 through 27, it says, "So Judah said to his brothers, 'What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh.' And his brothers listened." So then that's exactly what they did. An Ishmaelite came around. They ended up selling Joseph to the Ishmaelites. And funny, I think this is the crazy part. They sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. 20, if you look at it, I had to Google search this. If you look up how much 20 shekels of silver is compared to the US dollar today, they sold their brother for $5 and I think 96 cents. That's how much their brother's life was worth to them. They didn't care. They had no idea. And just think about how Joseph felt about this whole process. Joseph this whole time was just trying to confide in his brothers and his family, ask them about the dream that he had, probably even go over, what does this dream mean? And then here it happens, his brother, and he already feels the hate from his brothers. He already feels unwanted. And then his brothers throw him into a pit. He had no idea this was going to happen. And then now his brothers take him and then they sell him into slavery. This is what they ended up doing to him, right? So then it says in Genesis 37:29, it talks about how Reuben returns to the pit. And it says, then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. So back then, whenever in the Bible, when it says that they tore their clothes, that means they're grieving, that means they're mourning, that means they suffered a heavy loss at some point. So, I mean, Reuben was distraught. He didn't know what happened to his brother. He was going to come back and save his brother from the pit. It wasn't his intentions for his brother to go out like that. While his other brothers, they said, man, we got to get rid of him. He has to go. We don't want him around anymore. So then Joseph ended up being sold to Egypt. He was sold to an officer of the Pharaoh, who was a captain of the guard. So in Genesis 37:36, it says, now that the Midianites had sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. So fast forward, we're going to skip chapter 38, go straight to 39. This is where Joseph is now made an overseer in the Egyptian officer's house. And we're going to go over why. And it's because God had favor over Joseph. So God had favor over him. And in doing so, that automatically blessed the land that Joseph was overseeing and working in. And the officer of the guard, who was of Pharaoh, the officer of Pharaoh, he noticed that. And then so he ended up making Joseph the overseer of his house. So it says in 39:4, it says, so Joseph found favor in his sight, and he served him. And then he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put under his authority. So now Joseph, he's been hated by his brothers, then he got sold into slavery. Now he's been doing a little bit of work, and then through his work, now people are recognizing that God is blessing him, and there's some grace amongst Joseph. So now they gave Joseph a little bit of position of power, right? So now bad happens to Joseph all over again. It says in the Bible that Joseph was handsome, and not only in form but in appearance. So the officer's wife started having eyes for Joseph. She wanted to get with Joseph. And she made multiple attempts on Joseph to get with him, but Joseph, he held his dignity, and he had a lot of integrity, and he was still a man of God. Being in the fact that he was living in Egyptian land, he wasn't surrounded by his Hebrew brothers and sisters anymore, wasn't in that culture anymore, but he still had a heart for God. So it says in Genesis 39:7, it says, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. So Joseph ended up refusing, and he said, but he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it ended up saying that Joseph is seeing the officer's wife daily. He's always running into her. So therefore she's always probably throwing game his way, trying to convince him that, hey, we should have a good time. So it says in Genesis 39:10, it says, so it was, and she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. So she got mad about this. Joseph seen her daily, and daily Joseph rejected her. He said, I don't want you, we're not doing this, it's not right, and it's definitely not right in the Lord's eyes. So she ended up getting mad at Joseph, and she ended up lying on him. And in doing so, that ultimately puts Joseph in a bad situation. So this is what happened. This is what the Bible says, Genesis 39:10. It says, so it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. But it happened about this time, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand, and fled and ran outside. And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and fled outside, that she called to the men of the house, and spoke to them, saying, See, he has brought in us a Hebrew to mock us. He came into me to lie with me, and cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice, and cried out, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and went outside. Wow. So Joseph did everything he could to escape that situation. Joseph literally ran away from lustful temptations. Most of us can't even walk past somebody without double looking at them. Most of us, aren't faithful enough to our significant others or faithful enough to our relationship with God to sit here and say, hey, I'm not going to fall into that temptation. Joseph here, not being in a land who worships God, not being in the culture of which he was growing up in, was still sitting here abiding by God's rule. And he kept telling her no, and it got to the point that even as she put hands on him, he had to get out of that situation any way he could. So he ended up moving his garment off of him and took off running. He had to run outside the house. He didn't want to be caught dead with her. He didn't want to do anything with her. Fled away. She ended up lying on him, told the men of the house, the guards of the house, and then ends up telling her husband, which is the officer of Pharaoh. And whenever he found out about that, he was so angry and he was so mad at Joseph. He ends up throwing Joseph into prison. And that's what in Genesis 39:20, it says this. It says, Then Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Now, while Joseph was in prison, Joseph came across a chief baker and a chief butler that found themselves in prison. I don't know why they are in prison. The Bible doesn't state, but it does state this, that the chief baker and the chief butler both had dreams while in prison, and they were sad one day. And then Joseph looked at him and said, why are y'all so sad? What's wrong? And they told Joseph about their dreams, and they couldn't figure out. They didn't know what the dreams meant, and it was really bothering them. So God gave Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. So Joseph interpreted both their dreams, told them what would happen. He told the chief baker pretty much that his dream meant that he will be released in 3 days, and then he will be hung. That he will die. And then he told the chief butler that he will be released in 3 days, and that he will see favor in Pharaoh, and he will be returned to a position of authority. It came to pass that Joseph's dreams were correct. They got released in 3 days. And all Joseph said was, he asked for them, do not forget me. Don't forget about me and what I've told you. Because I'm not supposed to be here. I don't want to be here. I did nothing to be here in prison. So please tell Pharaoh about me so that maybe I could be released. And it says just this. It says in Genesis 40:14 through 15, it says, when Joseph was telling the chief baker and the chief butler to not forget about him, he said, but remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon. Pause, time out for a second. How compassionate is Joseph? He's in prison by means that wasn't his fault. Yet again, he's found himself in another situation. The first situation was he was thrown into a pit and then sold to be a slave. Wasn't his fault. It was just because his father loved him more, gave him a colorful tunic. Joseph then expressed that he had dreams that his brothers and family would bow down to him. And he was then, for doing that, and for having his father to love him. He was thrown into the pit and then was sold. Now, Joseph found favor in the Egyptian land, favor by the officer of Pharaoh, and the officer's wife was trying to get with Joseph, and Joseph didn't want anything with it. She lied on Joseph, got him sent to prison, and even through those tragic things that have occurred in Joseph's lives, he still wasn't bitter. He still showed kindness to other people who seemed sad and didn't know what was going on. And they said, yeah, we don't know what our dreams mean. He could have sat here and said, you're sad over dreams? You have nothing to be sad about, because I truly have something to be sad about. For I was sold into slavery. For I was put in prison. I was sold into slavery by my own family members. And I was put in prison by somebody that I wasn't even trying to get with. You have nothing to be sad over. But instead, Joseph saw their problems, took heart in it, gave them, prophesied over what their dreams meant, and then just simply asked, don't forget about me. Showed me kindness, and let Pharaoh know that I'm here, and it's not by my doings that I'm here. You know, just don't forget about me and try to help me to get out of this jail, out of this prison. So it says in Genesis 40:23, because they forgot about Joseph. They went and lived their lives, and then the chief baker and chief butler did their thing. The chief baker ended up getting hung, just as Joseph said. He died. And then the chief butler gained favor from Pharaoh's eyes and got his position of power back. So it says in Genesis 40:23, it talks about how the chief butler did not remember Joseph. It says, yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph may have been his only opportunity to get out of there. And there it went. The butler forgot about him. The one who was getting favor from Pharaoh now and got his authority back and could have put in a good word for him, he forgot all about him. Now, in Genesis 41, verse 1, it states that Joseph was in prison for 2 years. 2 whole years have now passed. It says, then it came to pass in the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by a river. Now this is what Pharaoh's dream was. He had 2 back-to-back dreams, and he didn't know what the dreams were talking about. It had one dream was there were 7 cattle, and they were feeding by this river, and then 7 sickly, ugly cows came out of the water and devoured the 7 cows that were fat and healthy. Then it talked about how there were these 7 grains of stalk, and then all of a sudden, out of those 7 grains of stalk came other grains of stalk that devoured them, and then there was nothing, right? And Pharaoh didn't know what these dreams meant, so he called for all of his magicians in the land, and he called for all of his wise men in the land to come out to help him figure out his dreams. None of them were able to figure it out. And then that's whenever the chief butler remembered Joseph. And then he was like, hold on, wait. There was somebody that interpreted my dream, and my dream came to pass. And he's the Hebrew servant who is in the prison. Maybe he can help you interpret your dream. So Pharaoh called for him to be released. It even states in the Bible they got him cleaned up. And then he said, bring him out. Let's have him interpret this dream. So that's what they ended up doing. So in Genesis 41-16, Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh. And, well, he's about to interpret the dream for Pharaoh, but before he does, he tells Pharaoh this. He says, it's not I that does these works, it's God that does these works. So in 41:16, it states, so Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So here we are. Joseph's been locked up for 2 years in prison. Not his fault. Been sold into slavery. Has been hated by his brothers. And yet, he's still giving glory to God. He's still telling people it's not me that's doing these great wonders. It's God. He's not bitter. He's not allowing these bad circumstances to change him. So now once he gave that glory, then he ends up interpreting the dreams for Pharaoh. And in doing so, this is what Joseph's interpretations of the dreams are. He pretty much tells Pharaoh that the 7 cows and the 7 grains of stock that come up, those are to say that there's going to be 7 years of greatness in Egypt. And then the 7 ugly cows that come out and devour the healthy cows, and the 7 grain that come out and devour the other grain stalks, those are going to be 7 years of famine in Egypt. And then so now Pharaoh's asking questions. He's like, what does this mean? What are we going to do? And then Joseph, no one can provide an answer. So then Joseph steps up and he says, well, here's what we're going to do. Here's the game plan. He runs them through the game plan. He tells them how you are going to store up grain in each of the cities and towns. That way for 7 years. That way whenever the 7 years of famine hits, we're going to have all the food supply and sources. And then when people come to search for the food, we're going to have all the food, we're going to be able to supply our people, and we're going to be able to persevere through this famine. The Pharaoh was very pleased with what Joseph had said. So then the Pharaoh ends up appointing, and now keep in mind, we went from Joseph being under the officer of the Pharaoh to now Joseph is speaking directly to the Pharaoh of Egypt, right? And the Pharaoh is so pleased with Joseph's answers and his wittiness and his wisdom. He sat there and said, okay, I'm going to have you rule over my house. I'm going to have you rule over my people. And the only thing that's going to be greater than you is my throne. So now Joseph just elevated. He went from being a prisoner of 2 years. He went from working in the field to now overseeing a house for the officer of Pharaoh, to then being in prison, to then now being the overseer of all of Pharaoh's land and of Pharaoh's house, pretty much being second in charge, right? So in Genesis 41, 39 through 43, it states this. It says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off of his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in the garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, Bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. That is big. That's huge. And the reason why that's huge, stop and think about this. Joseph's been given all glory to God. He never lost hope in God. He never lost hope in this situation. So there God was elevating Joseph each step of the way. Just helping him out, increasing Joseph. The more Joseph stayed in faith to God and didn't sit here and curse God for having such a horrible outcome in life, God was then sending him blessings and making way for him and fighting his battles for him and preparing Joseph for greatness. So now in Genesis 41, 55 through 57, it talks about how now the famine was over the face of the earth. So the Bible is saying that the famine wasn't just in Egypt, but in all of the earth, there was famine for 7 years. So it states, So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, then do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the lands. So now Joseph's plan is working. Everyone from all the countries are coming over to come get the grain from Egypt, because Egypt has the food. They have the supply. No one else has the supply, but Egypt has, and they have it because of Joseph's wisdom, right? So now this even furthers Joseph's credibility in Pharaoh's eyes, I can imagine. And then now, don't forget, what was Joseph's dreams? His dreams were that his brothers were going to bow down to him, and he had dreams that sheaves of wheat, his bundle, and then his brothers' bundles of wheat were bowing down to Joseph's bundle of wheat. He also said in his dream that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were going to bow down to Joseph, being his family members would bow down to Joseph. So then it talks about this. It says, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, how old is Joseph now? Joseph is now the right-hand man of Pharaoh. He got enslaved at 17 years old. Where is he at now in this point of life? He's already been through 2 years of had prison time. What's he doing right now? Well, in Genesis 41 through 46, it tells us that Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he became the Pharaoh's right-hand man. So that means 13 years had passed since he was sold by his brothers. He had 13 years of hardship before he was then made the right-hand man of Pharaoh, which he had no dreams or aspirations or no goals he was setting to become the right-hand man. That's all through the grace of God. But 13 years went by that he didn't have any anger, he didn't have any bitterness. He wasn't cursing God. He wasn't wondering why his circumstances are the way they are. I've done everything right in your eyes, Lord. You know, I didn't come on to the officer's wife. I told her it is a sin in God's eyes, and it would be wrong to my master. You know, I respected my brothers. What more do you want from me? I'm in prison. I stated that it's all you. I didn't sit here and was mad at you because I was thrown in prison by somebody else's doings. But for 13 years he held his composure and he stayed faithful, and he didn't allow that to change his character. So now that the famine was all over the face of the earth, Genesis 42 verses 6 through 8, it talks about how Joseph then sees his brothers come. So it says this: now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So now Joseph's dreams, one of his dreams just became true. That his brothers would bow down to him to get food. His dream was that there were sheaves of wheat, and his sheaf of wheat was before his brother's sheaves of wheat, and their brother's sheaves of wheat were bowing down to Joseph's wheat. That's the resemblance of food right there. That's the symbolism, right? So then Joseph he's questioning them. He's saying, "Man, you know what? Are y'all spies? Are y'all spies to come and see how bare Egypt is and how we have nothing? Is that what y'all came to do?" And this is what his brothers were responding to him. In Genesis 42, 10 through 13, it states, "And they said to him, 'No, my lord,'" pretty much, "no, we're not spies, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of the one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." Now, when Joseph heard that, we're going to get to it. Joseph heard that they said that there is a youngest with his father. Last time Joseph checked, he was the youngest brother. There's no one younger than him. So now in his mind, he's like, they're lying to me. They don't even recognize me, because he's the right-hand man of Pharaoh. He doesn't look like a Hebrew anymore. I'm sure he's dressed like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. He smells like an Egyptian. He has clothes of an Egyptian. Everything about him says, I'm an Egyptian, not a Hebrew. So his brothers don't recognize who he is. And now his brothers, he feels, might be lying to him. You have a younger brother that's at the house with your dad, with our dad, when I'm the younger brother? So you're lying to me now. So Joseph ends up putting them in prison for 3 days to test their word. In Genesis 42:16-17, it says, "Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison 3 days. So now his brothers got locked up. He's going to test them for their word. He ends up releasing his brothers and tells them pretty much to go about their way. He keeps one brother back as a way to ensure that they will return back to him. And in Genesis 42, verses 21, and then we'll skip 22 and verses 21 pretty much through 24, Joseph's brothers feel guilty about what's happening. They're like, man, God's really coming upon us over the blood that of our brother that we caused. You know, what are we going to do? You know, they start freaking out. The whole time they're speaking in Hebrew, they don't know that Joseph understands Hebrew. So in Genesis 42-21, it starts off by saying this. It says, "Then they said to one another, 'We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us. And we would not hear, therefore, this distress that has come upon us.' And Reuben answered to them, saying, 'Did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us.' But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes." Now, why did Joseph weep? What's the point of him crying? Joseph was crying because his brothers were then conversating in a language that they didn't know that he understood. They were sitting here wondering, you know, there's a lot of stress upon us. We feel guilty for what we did to our brother 13 years ago, and now God is coming upon us and he's pretty much showing his wrath on us. And then Reuben is now speaking out saying, you know, did I not tell y'all that we shouldn't do this? I told y'all this wasn't a good idea. But yet y'all went ahead and sold him anyways. Y'all got rid of him. Y'all knew we shouldn't have done this. So Joseph felt and knew that they felt bad about the situation. They're caught up. And they have no idea who Joseph really is. So Joseph, as he's watching this and listening to this go on, he's starting to understand that maybe they do have a change of heart. So that's why Joseph ended up crying. He still put one of his brothers in prison, Simeon, and then sent his brothers along their way. And so, but before they went out, he filled his brothers' sacks with grain and money. So in Genesis 42:25, it states, "Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to a sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them." Even after all those hardships he's went through, I don't have to keep naming them off. I think we know by now. You know, my man was hated on. He was put in prison. He was sold as a slave. And even in all those doings, and he feels like his brothers are lying to him. He still sent his brothers back to their land, all except for one. gave them all their food that they could carry, and then restored all their money that they just put into buying the food. So essentially, they came there with a dub. They came out with food and money, so they pretty much got free food. They're missing a brother, but the game plan is that they go and get their youngest brother, whose name is Benjamin. They bring Benjamin back to Egypt, and they show Joseph, who is now second in command, only one higher than him is Pharaoh, and they show him that they do have a younger brother and that their word is true. Therefore, Simeon will then be released from prison, and all will be good. So they end up having to try to convince their father that, hey, you know what, we got into a bit of a situation. We know you didn't want Benjamin to come the first time because the last time that your youngest went out, he ended up dying, which, we'll backtrack a little bit. Their brothers went back to their dad after they sold Joseph to slavery. They went back to their dad and told their dad, because they had Joseph's tunic. Remember, they took the tunic off before they threw him into the pit. And then they killed a baby goat, dipped his tunic in the goat's blood, showed the tunic to their dad, told their father that Joseph was killed by a wild beast. And their dad was super sad about that. So then whenever his dad had Benjamin, he was very protective over Benjamin. He didn't want to lose his youngest son again. So Benjamin never traveled with them to Egypt the first time, but now when they came back, they had to say, hey, Pops, we need Benjamin to come with us to Egypt in order to get Simeon out. And their dad was super against it. He said, I already lost my youngest once. I'm not going to do it a second time. So then Judah ends up telling him, the guy that had the idea to sell Joseph in the first place and convince the other brothers to do so, he ends up telling his dad that, hey, you know, if anything happens to Benjamin, take my two sons and kill them. And may there be, you know, may my mistakes weigh heavy on me for the rest of my days. Now they ended up running out of the food that Joseph sent with them, their grain, and then their dad was like, you know what, Israel, aka Jacob, he's like, you know, we're out of food. Take Benjamin. Just do what you can to keep him safe. And return the money. Give all that money back to the Pharaoh's man. And because that may have been a mistake. He may not have really wanted to give you all that money. And then give them a gift too. So they gave them bread to bring with them to offer as a gift, right? So here they go. Their brothers return to Egypt. And they come with the youngest brother, Benjamin. And then Joseph, when he sees his brothers, he declares a feast for them and to meet him at noon in his house. So Genesis 43:16 states this. It says, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. Then Joseph ended up, after he met his younger brother Benjamin, he ended up weeping and crying again. So Joseph, he keeps getting real emotional about being around his brothers. He doesn't have a heart of anger towards them. He's crying, you know. He has a heart for them still. So in Genesis 43:29 through 30, it talks about that. It says, then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, serve the bread. And the bread was the gift that his brothers brought with them. So now, this is an important thing to mention. The Egyptians and the Hebrews were not allowed to eat together. The Egyptians saw that the Hebrews were an abomination, so therefore you weren't allowed to eat with me. Pretty much saying y'all are dogs. Just as anything else. If you have have animals in the house, or if I don't know. I don't know how else to compare it to other than the animal. You sit here and say, you better get that dog off that table. That's the table we eat on now. You better get that dog off that table. Get that cat off the, whatever it is. You don't want anything dirty on the table that you're eating. Everything has to be clean. The Egyptians felt the same way about Hebrews. They viewed them as dirty people. Filthy animals. They weren't treated as humans, so they had to sit off at another table separate from where the Egyptians ate. So in Genesis 43, verse 32, it says, so they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. That's a key thing to remember. And we'll go back to that later on in the book. Now, for the second time, Joseph is about to send his brothers off. He's about to send them back home to their travels, back to Canaan. And Joseph is going to set his brothers up again. He's first, they were men of their word with the truth. They really brought back a younger brother. His name was Benjamin. So that checked out for him. Joseph ends up releasing Simon from prison, sends them all back, gives them all the grain that they can carry. He fills all their purses up with money. And then he tells the steward, put my silver cup in the youngest brother's pouch of money. Did all this without everybody knowing that he was doing this. Right? In Genesis 44, verses 1 through 2, states just that. It says, and he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, in his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. Now Joseph's plan to test his brothers was to sit here and see, are y'all gonna lie? What's going to happen whenever y'all find out that we're now saying that you stole the silver cup? What are y'all going to do in that situation? Because I'm going to set the youngest brother Benjamin up. How are y'all going to react? And what are your hearts going to be towards your younger brother when he gets caught with my silver cup? And we're going to go ahead and say that he stole my cup. What is y'all's reaction is going to be to that? Because whenever I was a younger brother, and y'all knew that father loved me more than all y'all threw me into a pit and sold me into slavery. Y'all even talked about killing me at one point. How are y'all going to treat Benjamin? So, it says in Genesis 44, verses 4 through 5, it says, when they had gone out into the city, and they were yet not far off, Joseph said to his steward, get up and follow them in. And when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and with which he indeed practices divination? You have done evil in so doing. So the steward went exactly did just that. He overtook them. He told them pretty much empty your bags, and whoever has my master's silver cup, there's going to be consequences behind that. So their brothers were super confident they didn't steal anything and they would never commit no evil, especially after good has already been done to them. The steward says, I don't care. Empty everything that y'all have. And as they do so, the youngest brother, Benjamin, empties his bag, and there's the silver cup. There's the silver cup. The steward ends up taking Benjamin with him back to Egypt because they made this deal saying, hey, if the cup is found, he's going to be the slave. And y'all aren't going to see him again. And that's that. And the brothers were so confident before the cup was found, they said, man, kill the person who has the cup, and the rest of us can be a slave. So whenever the steward found the cup in Benjamin's bag, now in their mind, they were like, oh man, we just said that whoever has the cup, he can be killed. Kill him. So now in their minds, Benjamin is being sent off, and Benjamin is about to get murdered for stealing a silver cup. And none of them really stole the cup, but they're wondering, how did this even happen? How did we get ourselves into this situation? We didn't steal, but yet there's the silver cup. And we just offered Benjamin to be murdered. We didn't even know that there was a silver cup in his bag, but here he is. He's about to get murdered, and it wasn't his fault that a silver cup was in his bag. Same situation as Joseph was in. It wasn't his fault, but he got thrown into a pit. It wasn't his fault, but he was sold to slavery. It wasn't his fault, but he got sent to prison. All happened to the youngest brother. So they followed the steward and Benjamin back to Egypt, into the city. And what happened was, now you have, what's his name? What is his name? Is the one that sold, he sold Joseph into slavery. Judah. It was Judah. Yeah, Judah. Judah ends up sticking up for his brother Benjamin and offers to take his place. This is what he was told. Well, before he did that, Genesis 44:17, Joseph tells his brothers this. He pretty much tells them, hey, y'all can leave, but Benjamin is staying with me. Y'all are free to go. He stole my cup. He's now my slave. He said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. He just gave his brothers a pass. Leave him. He's the one that stole the cup, not you. He's testing his brothers yet again. He's checking their heart to see what they're going to do. So now Judah then offers himself in place of Benjamin. And in Genesis 44, verse 33, it says this. It says, now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad being Benjamin, as a slave to my Lord. So please let I, Judah, be a slave instead of Benjamin, as a slave to my Lord. And let the lad go up with his brothers. So now Judah, the one that originally sold Joseph off, is now showing that he has a change of heart. He's not the same Judah that he was 13 years ago. I'm a new Judah. I love my youngest brother. I'll do anything to protect him. I'll even offer myself in his place and become a slave for the rest of my life, as long as no harm comes to Benjamin. So Joseph then tells his brothers, that hit Joseph so deep and so hard. He ended up having to cry, and he had to expose himself and tell them who he was. It just touched his heart that his brother was so willing to take the youngest brother's place and allow his youngest brother to suffer like that he had to tell them who he was. So in Genesis 45, verses 1 through 4, states this. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept out loud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Man. So he revealed himself to his brothers, and he also told his brothers, don't be angry. Because God created all this to happen. It all lined up in God's will, and he's basing it off of the dreams that he had before. So, he brings glory to God, and then in verses 5 through 11, he ends up deciding to help his brothers. And by helping to do his brothers, he tells his brothers to go and get everybody and bring them to the land of Egypt. Bring everybody in the family, and then come back, and I'm gonna put a place for you in Egypt. I'm gonna give you a place to stay. I'm gonna provide everything that you need. You won't have to worry about this famine anymore. I love you. I care for you. I'm gonna bring you back in. I'm now the second man in charge. Anything I say goes. So Genesis 45, 5 through 11 says this. It says, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years of famine have been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. For there are still 5 years of famine. Now, Pharaoh had heard all this. Remember what we said, the Egyptians viewed Hebrews as abominations, filth, animals. They couldn't even eat at the same table as them. Pharaoh's an Egyptian. Joseph was not. Joseph was just acting as an Egyptian. But he was not born into that lifestyle. So, when Pharaoh hears of this, Pharaoh agrees with Joseph's plan. And so, in Genesis 45, 16 through 23, this is what Pharaoh says. It says, Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come, so please Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, and do this, load your animals and depart. Go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded to do this. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. Also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of the land of Egypt is yours. So Pharaoh is now willing to give Joseph's family, the Hebrews, the best of their land during a time of famine, during a time when all the earth has no food. No one can grow anything. And Pharaoh is saying, go get your family and bring them, and we'll put them in the best part of the land of Egypt. Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh. and gave them provisions for the journey. He gave all of them, to each man, changes of garments, but to Benjamin, the youngest, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And he sent to his father these things. They gave them 10 donkeys, and loaded them with good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys, and loaded them with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. Now, if we go to Genesis chapter 46, verse 27, pretty much what it's been saying in all of chapter 46 is it's talking about all the family that Joseph has. Everybody that's came from Jacob, aka Israel. All of Joseph's brothers, his wives, the brothers and their wives that they have, the kids that all of his brothers have. It's talking about the whole family tree of that in chapter 46. Now, Joseph has 11 brothers. They've been getting busy. They have a big family. So what ends up happening is they have 70 family members that end up traveling from the land of Canaan to Egypt. So in chapter 46, verse 27, it says, "And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons," because Joseph had 2 sons of his own. And it says, "all the persons of the house of Jacob," Jacob being Israel, and Jacob, aka Israel, being Joseph's father. "And all the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. They had 70 people travel with them from Canaan to Egypt to go stay in the best land of Egypt. While there's 5 years left of famine. 5 years left of famine, and Pharaoh said, "Bring everybody." There's a huge food shortage and supply going around, but bring all your people and put them. We're gonna put you in the best part of the land also, and you're never gonna have to worry about a thing ever again. So it comes to pass that Jacob, aka Israel, he ends up dying. He requests that Joseph buries him in the land of Canaan. He doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. He wants to be brought back to his homeland and be buried next to his wife. They honor his father's request. They bury him in the land of Canaan. And then his brothers were in fear now that their dad has passed and gone. What's going to happen to them? Is Joseph now going to have vengeance on us? Is he going to cast us out of the land of Egypt into the famine to where we can't fend for ourselves anymore? So in Genesis 50, verses 17 through 21, it talks about how they asked Joseph for forgiveness. And it's also what their father wanted. Their father sent a messenger to ask for their brother's forgiveness on his behalf. So here's what ends up happening. It says, "So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, 'Before your father died, he commanded, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph,'" tell him what his brothers should say to Joseph, "'I beg you, please forgive the trespasses of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespasses of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' And Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones.' And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them." How crazy is that? Joseph shows kindness to him, compassion, um, for forgiveness. He acknowledges that, yeah, you did mean to do me evil and harm all those years ago, but all is forgiven. It's okay because I know it was all in God's plan. I know all this worked out, and I had to go through those hardships, and I had to suffer because ultimately it was God's plan for me to end up saving all of you from the famine that was covering the whole earth. It was in God's plan that I had to spend 13 years suffering the way I did and go through all that hardship for this moment right here to occur. For me to be able to now take all of our family, our entire bloodline, our entire lineage, and now we are all saved and we are all together once again. And he's giving glory to God all over again. And he's saying, don't bow down to me, don't ask me forgiveness, for I'm not God. He has all this power in Egypt. A Hebrew is second in charge in Egypt. And he doesn't let all that power get to him. He instead gives glory to God, recognizes what God's plan was of him, even though he didn't know what it was from the start, for we walk by faith and not by sight. That's in 2 Corinthians 5-7. I think 2 Corinthians 7 is one of those two, but it says, for we walk by faith and not by sight. Man. And the crazy thing is I told Brother Curtis this earlier today, but at one point we were all chasing real estate riches, searching for generational wealth and passive income, and here it was that God was providing Joseph that passive income and that generational wealth, that spiritual wealth, the spiritual riches that only God can provide. And it was Joseph's brothers that did evil and harm to him, but yet they were blessed in God's eyes because of Joseph's obedience to God and his faith in God. And he never allowed his character to be changed or to be flawed. He was tested with lust. He ran away from lust, literally ran away from it. He could have been tested by not showing any kindness or empathy or compassion towards the chief baker and the chief butler in prison. But he set aside his own personal feelings at that time to make sure that they were okay, to help them out during a time where they were sad. He set himself aside. And that ended up landing him a role into telling what Pharaoh's dream and into interpreting Pharaoh's dream, which then led him to being second in command. Because none of Pharaoh's magicians and none of his wise men could do it. But Joseph was able to do it. And before Joseph did so, he gave glory to God and said, this isn't through my power. This is through God's power. And even whenever Joseph's brothers hated him because his father stated that he loved him more and it gave him a colorful tunic. Back then they probably had some one color tunic, some beiges, some browns, things of that nature. He had a colorful tunic showing every day he wore that tunic was a direct representation and direct just showcasing into his brother's face saying, Father loves me more. And even being hated, he still loved his brothers. And he had all the power to throw them all into prison, never let them out the moment they even seen him that first day in Egypt when they came to come get food. But Joseph remembered the dreams that God gave him, the visions. And instead of allowing all that power to go to his head, he forgave them. And he was slowly forgiving them. He didn't forgive them all the way. It took a little bit of time. But he didn't jump to anger and to wrath. He said, man, let's fill this situation out. I feel like you're lying to me. You're saying that you have a younger brother. I am the younger brother, so prove to me. Because right now I think you're a liar. He gave them opportunity to prove themselves to him. Then they came back and he said, man, let's set him up and let's put my silver cup in the youngest brother's cup and he'll be my slave forever. Will they turn their back on Benjamin like they turned their back on me? And yet they didn't. So they showed Joseph that one, they're not liars anymore. Then they showed Joseph number two, they showed him that they have a change of heart and they're willing to give up their own freedom for their little brother. So their little brother doesn't have to suffer, and so that their father doesn't have to suffer. Father being Jacob, aka Israel. I mean, he could have done so much wrong, but he chose not to, and he chose to remain faithful in the Lord. And one thing before we cut off here is I just wanted to go over the times that God showed Joseph favor, and it stated that in the Bible. There's 3 times it states that from the courses of chapters 37 all the way through 50. If we go to chapter 37, verses 2 through 3. God's favor of Joseph. That's wrong. Disregard that. But verses 37:5. No. Where was it? 37:21. Oh, here it is. All right, so go to Genesis 39 verses 2 through. Let's go verses 2 through 5. It says, this is back when Joseph was sold into slavery. Now he was working in the field. All right, he was working for the officer of Pharaoh. It says this: the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had put under his authority. So God was with him even after he was sold into slavery. And because Joseph was still so faithful to the Lord, that everything Joseph was around was prosperous. The Lord was blessing it. He was blessing everything around him because of Joseph's obedience to the Lord. Right? If you go to when Joseph was in prison, right? It said that it says in verses 21, after Joseph was put in prison, it says this. It says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Then let's fast forward back to whenever Joseph brought 70 of his family members. The majority of them he didn't even know. Yet again, the Lord provided a way for all of them to be blessed because of one man's obedience in him. So the things that we should take away from the story of Joseph is this. I mean, Joseph was acting Christ-like and acting and was showing forgiveness way before Jesus even stepped on the scene. Jesus taught us to forgive one another and to love one another and to turn away from anger. Joseph was showing the characteristics of Christ before Christ was even here on earth. Joseph forgave his brothers. Joseph didn't turn to anger during all those hardships that he was going through. He didn't forsake God. He didn't say, God, why did you do this to me? Why I don't deserve any of this? Why is so much bad happening to me? He set himself aside to serve others around him. He gave glory to God, not knowing what the outcome of it would be. So we have to remember that we need to carry a little bit of a Joseph in this everywhere we go. That if we're going through a season of hardship, if financially we're struggling, if we're working a job we don't like, if there's people we're surrounded by that we don't like, if things just aren't, whatever the case is, it's just your life just isn't working out the way you want it to. Joseph's a key example in this. Go to God. Have faith in God. Know that God is going to see you through it. And if you truly believe, and if you truly know that He has you and He's not going to let you fall, then you're going to prevail, and He's going to make you, He's going to deliver you from the darkness that you're in, and He's going to uplift you and bring you to a higher elevation, a higher level. Joseph went from being a hated little brother to a slave, to a prisoner, to the second in charge in all of Egypt. It took 13 years, and Joseph lived to be 110 years old. It took 13 years before Joseph was ever able to accomplish that. So at 30 years old, Joseph got into that position. But it took 13 years of unknowing what God has in store for him, and 13 years of not knowing what was going to happen. 13 years of everything just not going right for him. We have like a 3-month period, or maybe a 6-month period, or a year period of things going bad, and we can't handle it, and we're sitting here wondering, what did we do to deserve it? We deserve more. I'm this, I'm that. Joseph spent 13 years like that. So God's working, and He'll always work in our lives. We have to put Him first. Point blank period. We got to put Him first. And we got to know that He will deliver us from any situation that we're in. And sometimes when we're in seasons of uncertainty, when we're in seasons of life just being unfair, things going bad, and it's not even our fault, even though we're doing all the right things, but nothing is working for us, we have to remember that God has a plan for us. And He's just building us up, and He's growing us so that He can elevate us to the status of where He needs us to be at in life, so we can do something not for ourselves, but for other people, as Joseph did for all of his 70 family members. All that it wasn't about Joseph being elevated to second in charge in Egypt and working directly underneath the Pharaoh. It was about him being able to save his family and his generations that came after him. Provided them in a period where there was no food on earth. Now they have food to eat. They're in the best land of Egypt. They have nothing to worry about. That's what everything was about. And it was through one man's obedience and faith. So imagine that you're that one person, your inner circle and your family and your group of friends. You're the one person who has faith. You're the one person who's always praying for those around you. You're the one person who's being obedient in what God is telling you to be obedient in. You're the one person turning your life away from the sinful ways that you have been living, and you're truly living your life for God. What will God do for you in your life? How will God work for you in your life? And you don't need to know what His finish line is. You just need to take your steps forward in faith and know that He's got you. That's my message tonight. That's the first series of I don't even know what we're going to call it, but we don't got a name for it yet, but that's the story of Joseph, though. So, reflect on that, listen to that again if you want to, play it back. But remember those words, and remember that don't lose sight in what the Lord has for you. Walk by faith and not by sight.